Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 7th lecture on our Cold War series. And we're going to shift our focus more into domestic issues regarding exactly what was going on within the United States of America during the 1950s and, of course, the Cold War. Now, of course, many people have described America as being a place that had two Americas. The America for people who were able to scale up that social ladder in prosperity and see a greater economic and even social, I would say, improvement in life. And the other side where their lives were improved as well, comparatively speaking, economically. However, you could say that there were many impediments in place preventing them from enjoying the same kind of prosperity as others. So this is also going to be a time where we're going to see the expansion of television and what we might think of as, I guess you'd say, like early 20th century American culture. Like here we have a shot of Leave It to Beaver. Television shows at the time were very moralistic. They, of course, showed normal family life, tried to have a nice lesson along with it. And, of course, there were other modes of entertainment as well, such as, The Twilight Zone, which had a lot of impactful questions and things like that. So, a lot more religious television, things of that nature. Now, changes in America. Though the 1950s had been a time of existential anxiety, it was a relatively prosperous period for many Americans. And, of course, a lot of that has to do with the fact that people's wages were going up. So they were making more money. There were a lot more products out in the market for people to purchase, manufactured products, and things that have been improved scientifically. So we see the advent of plastic products. People who own televisions go from 9% in 1950 to 90% just 10 years later. More and more people are buying cars, automatic appliances that wash your clothes, microwave ovens to help warm up food. Refrigeration is on the rise. So a lot of things that we take for granted today were really coming out there and ballooning in American culture. So, as it says here on the second bullet, despite half of the U.S. budget going towards national security in 1955, much of this money also went into what we call R&D, that's research and development. So many of them were defense contracts and defense grants, but they're going to colleges and corporations. And even though they went into the hands of colleges and corporations, there was a bit of carryover effect. And so some of these breakthroughs would come out and find their way in the consumer markets. Large corporations ballooned. Salaries increased nearly 50%. So once again, more money in the hands of normal, everyday people. And for the first time in history, white-collar jobs outnumber blue-collar jobs. And of course, white-collar jobs, we're talking about jobs that had to do a bit more with skill and a bit less with manual labor. These days, we might consider them jobs that require college education to have. And of course, blue-collar jobs are more manual labor jobs. Now, that's not to say that things were all cheery for everybody, because we have to remember we had the legacy of the post-Civil War America. And this was very evident to many people in the South. However, it was also a northern problem as well. So here we see High Court bans segregation in public schools. So let's see a little bit about that. So civil rights. Changes across America. Despite the overall economic improvement in America, there was still a racial divide due to segregation. Throughout most of America, segregation and discrimination was de facto. Of course, that means de facto, we mean, you could say it's matter of fact, it's cultural, right? So, though there are not laws on the books in a lot of America in this time saying that black people had less rights and so on and so forth, the way that people lived, they expected it. And there was also a lot of behind-the-scene things going on that were rather racist, like not giving people home loans just because they're black, or having district lines where they're not allowed to live in certain parts of the city, even though the rules might not say that. Of course, in the South, you still had the leftover institution of Jim Crow, and here we see that it's de jure, and of course that means it's a matter of law. So there were still laws on the books within these states and municipalities that, and of course counties, that would prevent black people from using a restroom, same one as a white person. Of course, you got to remember this is still the era of separate but equal, and so we're going to see an end to that. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that separate but equal was in fact not equal. So here we have the case of a girl who lived close to a white school. However, she had to bus all the way across town to go to a black school that was much lower quality. It was real inconvenience. The books weren't good. The curriculum was terrible. The buildings stank. You know, it's like a whole lot of problems. And so they said that this was in fact not equal. And we're going to see somebody who's eventually going to become a Supreme Court justice is going to be the lawyer for this cause, and that's Thurgood Marshall. Now, this is going to make major headlines, and the court is going to declare that schools had to integrate with all deliberate speed, which is kind of, you know, it's not very exact. I mean, it's saying, you know, as fast as you can when you get ready. But gave little guidance on how to do so, as the courts were never intended to be a legislative body. So what we're saying here is the court said you need to fix this, but it wasn't their job to say how to fix it. That's more of a problem with the legislature or the local government. Desegregation took the spotlight next in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957. So the Supreme Court's ruling was in 1954. They're going to say do it with all deliberate speed in 1955, and it's going to take time. It's going to take decades in some places in the South for what we call desegregation or integration. So, all right, so speaking of Little Rock, this is a picture of the Little Rock Nine, and they are being protected by paratroopers just for a full school year, just so that they can go to class. So let's see a little bit about that. In 1957, Little Rock, Arkansas sought to integrate a high school. I forgot the name, sorry. Despite the state's governor sending the National Guard to stop these students. And it wasn't just the National Guard. If you'll recall, the National Guard ordinarily is under the authority of a state's governor. So, the governor of Arkansas was using these soldiers, these part-timers, to prevent these black students from going to what used to be a white-only school. As the 9 students attempted to attend class, throngs of angry parents, and of course other folks, and the troops prevented them from entering the building. In one incident, the students had to flee for their lives from an angry mob. So, they attempted to enter the school over and over again. Then one day they actually managed to sneak inside. The mob found out, and they were starting to make their way into the school. So the school staff actually put them on a bus, and one of the people there, might have been the principal, told the driver to just drive on. If you hit somebody, keep going, because these kids are going to die. And so things weren't looking too good in Arkansas. So President Eisenhower has had enough. He's going to nationalize the National Guard. And so what that means is he's going to take these state soldiers and he's going to make them into federal soldiers. So the president can supersede the governor's authority. And he did so here, so he could call them off. And so he sends in the regular army, the 101st Airborne, to protect the students all the rest of the school year. In 1955, Montgomery, Alabama, this is a whole other thing. In 1955, stepping back a little bit, we go from Arkansas to Alabama. And there we have another issue regarding segregation. So we have a lady named Rosa Parks who was trying to head home after a long day of work as a seamstress. And the story goes she was very tired and really just needed to have a seat where she was on the bus. The rule, however, was that black people had to sit in the back and white people had to sit in the front. As she sat in front, a white man demanded to have her seat. She refused, and this is going to become a big national deal. So, despite threats of violence, black people will then boycott the city buses in Montgomery, and they're going to start having organizations. This is going to get national spotlight. A young preacher named Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. is going to come in, and he's going to have a very motivational style of rhetoric that's going to be very Christian-based and very based on the idea of civil disobedience through nonviolence. And so this is something that goes all the way back to Tolstoy, where the idea that people can essentially turn the other cheek and show that their side is the morally just side, where the other is the aggressor, right? So, but unfortunately that doesn't exactly work like magic. The KKK and just general racists were pretty rampant in the area, and you have to understand that a lot of places in the South, in order to have your door or your foot within politics and even business, and that's true here for Texas as well back then, you had to be a member of the KKK. And so there's going to be a rash of bombings, including this is Martin Luther King Jr.'s house. His front porch is going to be bombed. His wife and his kids are going to be inside the house. They're going to be uninjured. But this is just to show you the level of terrorism that was going on. It's political violence to try to make them stop. So, as we mentioned before, civil rights through civil disobedience. And so we're going to see that there are going to be marches. And there's not just African Americans. You're going to see people who believe in racial equality are also going to join in these marches. They're also going to participate in sit-ins. We'll talk more about sit-ins in the future as we talk about college students doing that in diners, and that's going to catch fire across the country. They're going to conduct boycotts where they don't buy or use certain services because it denies them equality. And they're also going to face police brutality and mob violence. And of course, assassinations and assassination attempts and so on and so forth. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of ending segregation of buses. MLK's house was bombed. So, like I mentioned earlier, America was divided on the issue of civil rights, but Eisenhower's actions in protecting school children, the Supreme Court's rulings, as we've seen earlier, like Brown versus the Board of Education, the passage of Civil Rights Act in 1957 by Congress signaled that the federal government was ready to change the country. So, this is one of those things where you see it's a level of change within a country's culture that comes from both below and above. So you have everyday ordinary people out there pushing for this, but you also have a push from the nation's highest forms of government as well. As the movement carried on, Eisenhower's second term was ending. And so, keep that in mind. So, a lot of things are going on. You have the Civil Rights Movement. You have the Cold War. You have a stalemate, essentially, in Cuba, which is going towards Russia. and all these other things. And we're going to pick up with the president who follows Eisenhower next time. Bye.